today. Um, Thank you for recording. So our agenda for today, if you could go to next slide, is that we're going to start with a little bit of welcoming and framing, talk about how the To and Through project connects to the work that we will look at today. And then Sarah and Jenny will be presenting on the Precarious Prospects report, published jointly by IWERC and Consortium on School Research. And we are then going to end with some question and answer section. Please use the Q&A feature that is at the bottom of your screen to ask questions, clarifying, and analytical questions. We welcome them all. So please keep those questions coming throughout, and we'll save some time for Q&A at the end. We also have a post-webinar discussion from 3 o'clock to 3:30, and this is something that's sparked from requests from you all that we present new and important research and data, but then how do we move forward with that data? What do we want to do with it? So please come and stick around from 3 to 3:30 to have discussion about how the findings of this report can be applied to K-12 school context, to nonprofit context, to career and college contexts. We really need your all's ideation and support. So try to stick around from 3 to 3:30. Go ahead and head to the next slide for me, please. So the To and Through project, for those of you who don't know, is a research practice partnership with based at the University of Chicago Kirsten Institute for Urban Education. And our work is really about centering data, both quantitative and qualitative, for inquiry and impact. And we are really focused on the educational journeys of Chicago public school students. This report fits into a broader context of Illinois, but we know we sit into that context in Chicago public schools. And we seek to work alongside educational practitioners and stakeholders from across the system to help folks make meaning of data and elevate important data and research in the field with the goal of shifting practice. And all of that work is meant to help realize equitable learning experiences, pathways, outcomes for CPS students from the middle grades through college completion. And then just wanted to highlight a little bit of data that we put out annually through our To and Through and joint consortium report, our educational attainment report, which is coming up December 2nd. But a little bit of a preview, something that the report talks a lot about is the question of what is that value of a college degree or the different post-secondary pathways that students choose. And I think there's some folks who have discussed, like, are students still choosing college? Is this a pathway that is working for young people? And I love the findings that the report will illuminate around the value of that degree, but just wanted to connect to the fact that we know that students in CPS are still choosing college as a primary pathway. 2/3, 66% of CPS students as of the class of 2024 are enrolling in college. That includes both 2-year and 4-year pathways. And now I think the work that the report that we'll look at in a moment is how do we ensure that the students who are enrolling are able to complete that pathway and have vibrant, important, family-sustaining wages and career opportunities after completing that pathway. And that's why we're really excited to partner with IWERC, because our work sort of ends at that college completion space, but what happens next? And so we're excited to dig into that conversation with Jenny and with Sarah today. Next slide for me, please. And one thing that I will name about our conversation today is we are going to focus predominantly on outcomes data, sort of long-term quantitative data, but qualitative data matters too. We really talk about how at the To and Through project, qualitative data is also data. Stories matter. And so we do have a collection of student stories available publicly that tell a little bit about the journey of CPS students and alumni from as early as middle grades through high school, through college, and how they're navigating career as well. So I just wanted to plug that resource, and I'll put it in the chat for folks to check out to hear more of the stories of students and what their experiences with these pathways may be while we look at the more quantitative data in today's reports. And wanted to plug a couple of other things on the To and Through end. I mentioned that on December 2nd, we are going to have the release, a virtual one, of the Educational Attainment of CPS Students report for the class of 2024. Please come to that event. It's going to be a great way to really be in conversation about understanding those educational attainment outcomes. Where are we now? And situating that in the context of both the current moment, the state, and the national context. We'll hear from leaders from CPS, from the Partnership for College Completion, and higher education reporter Lisa Currian-Phillips to really give context and ask questions about why CPS students are where they are in terms of ed attainment. So please come. We're excited about that event. And then we also have 2 upcoming data collaborative spaces. In November, Chicago Youth Boxing Club will be presenting about their work on violence prevention and community building, and really excited about that data collaborative. And then in December, Kids First will be presenting their initial version of the State of CPS report that they release annually on December 16th. So join us for any of those free virtual events. And then we also have just a hiring announcement that we are looking for an amazing coach who works in the middle grades. So let me drop a link to this hiring note in the chat. If you know of anybody who would be a good fit for our middle grades network, manager of coaching and improvement role, that is an open role that we are looking to fill. So share that with your networks. And let me also drop the link to our events. And then I'm going to pass it over to my brilliant and beautiful colleagues, Jenny and Sarah, in just a moment, but let me give them a bit of their flowers to share a little bit about who they are. So Jenny Nagoka, we are privileged to work with her very closely as the deputy director of the UChicago Consortium and the senior advisor to the To and Through project. For over 25 years at the consortium, she has conducted research on education policy and practice. Her research interests include examining education transitions into high school, college, and beyond, and the role of social, emotional, and academic experiences in learning and development. She is passionate about supporting schools, districts, and the larger education community in using data to connect research and practice and transform how students experience schools and systems. And Sarah Cashdollar, we're so lucky to be joined by her as well, is the Associate Director of Research at the Illinois Workforce and Education Research Collaborative, or IWERC. Her work focuses on identifying factors that predict positive post-secondary education, training, and work outcomes for all youth. So thank you so much, Jenny and Sarah, for joining us today. We're so excited to dig into the takeaways from this really important and valuable report. And thank you for all the work you all do to ensure we understand the outcomes for students beyond post-secondary completion.
Great. Thank you so much, Alex and Sarah. I guess you'll put up our new set of slides. So I'm just like incredibly excited to be here today and really excited about this collaboration between the consortium and IWERC, and also the opportunity to be working with the state agencies. Sarah will be saying more about this, but we worked with the Illinois Department of Employment Security, testing my knowledge of acronyms here, ISB, the Illinois State Board of Education, and ISAC, the Illinois Student Aid Commission. And I think, one of the things that this project has shown us is the power of collaboration and data to guide us in supporting students. So it's building on the work that the consortium and To and Through have done, and taking us to another step in the educational journey that students take. And just repeating a little bit of what Alex just said, but from middle grades into high school and to college, and showing us what happens to them when they enter the workforce. And I'm also really excited because I think this report also gives us some evidence of a question that has been percolating up about what is the value of attending college? Is it still worth it? And opening up the big black box about what's happening to students post-college. And before turning it over to Sarah, who'll share us the findings report, I want to provide you some of the history of this work in Chicago and how this report, which is broader about Illinois students, fit in. So just please indulge me here, because I think I've reached the stage of my career where I'd like to not just share new findings, but also just describe with how they fit in with we've learned in the past and how they can be used to guide us in the future. So next slide, please. So a lot of you are familiar with this slide, and when I've been looking at it more recently, I find it kind of shocking because it's been almost 20 years since the consortium released its first report on the transition from high school to college. And this Tribune headline really galvanized so many people in the education community to work on figuring out how to help more students go to college. I think just that number of there being only six out of 100 ninth graders going to be getting a college degree was truly shocking. It was the first time that we had data to tell us about what was happening to CPS students after they graduated from high school. Prior to that, college access supports and interventions were largely based on assumptions about what students were doing at post high school. And I think also at that point in time, high schools did not really see their role as helping students go to college. And it was also generally assumed that most students and their families were not interested in high school. So I think that was kind of this big moment in college. The report really brought some numbers to a critical issue that was facing our city and really kind of led to the whole education community coming together. And part of our hope with this new report is that we are at a similar moment where we finally have the data to bring some clarity about what is happening to students when they move from college to the workforce. Okay, next slide, please. And kind of moving on to the next stage of the research that came out as the consortium so long ago, was also just kind of realizing, and this is a lot of you are familiar with this as well. This is the report Potholes on the Road to College, and the figure is kind of what we affectionately refer to as the potholes figure. And I think one of the things about this report, we saw it as like a critical stage in the research, was that knowing the nature of the problem, the magnitude of how many students are struggling with going to college and completing, is not the same as understanding where they are struggling and where people can be providing students with additional support. With this report, we were really seeking to provide some guidance to practitioners inside of CPS and in the larger college access community to know what were those key points on the road to college, aspiring to go to college, making plans to go, applying, being accepted, and finally enrolling in college. And so I think this is where we like kind of the next stage of what we need to be doing going forward is really thinking about where are those key points of intervention in supporting students to not just complete college, but to be successfully launching a career. And so today, I invite a lot of you to start thinking about what we need to be doing that students are not just going to and through college, but helping them avoid the potholes and supporting them into a career. Okay, next slide, please. And I think a lot of you are also familiar with this slide as well, because I think what this shows us is that history has shown that we actually can do this with our collective efforts inside of Chicago and beyond. And especially inside of CPS. Starting on the first stage, we've seen high school graduation rise to 85%. At one point in time, it was just over 50%. We've seen four-year college enrollment rise up from 34% to 48%, with a total of 64% enrolling in college. And now half of students who start in a four-year college are completing college. And so one of the key points here too is that we've seen the number of students, so moving over to the left side of things, we can see that the number of students who have enrolled in college has increased by thousands each year. So that is good news, although those numbers have leveled off in more recent years. You can see that by the numbers at the top of the figure on the left. And we're also seeing more and more students completing college. And so four-year degrees are in the darker green, and the lighter green represents students have completed at a two-year college. So we've actually seen the number of CPS graduates who have completed college double over the past 10 years. So that's all like really good news. And so it shows us that we can do it. But I think one of the things that Sarah will be showing us in this report is that the flip side of this is also a critical issue. So if you look in the darker gray, you know, it's great that we're seeing more students having the opportunity to go to college, but as more and more students go to college, we're also seeing the numbers of students who start college but do not complete is also increasing at a rate about almost 2,500 more students had started college and did not complete going from 2008 to 2017. Um, and I think we kind of know there's a lot of issues around this, and one of the more tangible issues around workforce outcomes is something that Sarah will share with us. And with that, I will turn it over to Sarah to provide more details about this.
Thank you, Jenny. So I'll start by saying that our state agency partners were really instrumental to this work, like Jenny was saying earlier. So IWERC, the Illinois Workforce and Education Research Collaborative, is now 5 years old. And part of our goal from day one has been to study Illinois student data from across agencies so that we can see their pathways longitudinally. But linking that data is no easy task. Fortunately, ISB, ISAC, and IDES plugged us in to the state's high school to career efforts, HS2C. And if you don't know this website, I highly encourage you to check it out, illinoishighschooltocareer.com. This website uses a data set that the agencies came together to create so that students and their families would have transparent data to guide decision making about college and career pathways. And so they made this website so that students, members of the public could see the real outcomes of Illinois students who took different paths. And then these agencies really helped us be written into the data sharing agreement that was used to make this website so that we could access the data too as researchers. And then they taught us about the data. They were thought partners as we undertook this work. In the case of our colleagues from the Illinois Student Assistance Commission, Erin Mitchell and Caitlin Clinton, we worked really closely with them. They became co-authors on the reports. And then the agency leads collaborated with IWERC's director and another co-author of the study, Meg Bates, to write an op-ed about the findings in Cranes. And so it's been this whole project has depended entirely on this agency partnership and willingness to collaborate. So the HS2C data set allowed us to look at the college and career outcomes for students who were high school seniors in Illinois between 2008 and 2012. We did not include all Illinois students in the sample because in order to have their data linked, students had to complete the free application for federal student aid, the FAFSA. That's what allowed us to link their high school and college records to their employment outcomes. And they had to be working in the state of Illinois in a stable job 3 years after college or their last educational enrollment. And so because of that, the sample is not representative for all groups. In particular, we're missing the vast majority, 3/4 of students with only a high school education. We think that these students were less likely to complete the FAFSA. And then because we had data from IDES, the Illinois Department of Employment Security, we only have workforce outcomes for students who worked in the state of Illinois. And so many students who went to college outside of Illinois also ended up working outside of Illinois, and we are not able to see their outcomes. So these are just some important limitations when interpreting the study's findings. We then took our sample and split students into 5 groups based on their parents' earnings as they reported it on the FAFSA. And we designated the 2 lowest earning quintiles as students from low-income families and the highest three as students from middle and high income families. So the low income families from these bottom two quintiles, um, they earned up to about $40,000 annually in 2017 dollars, which has a spending power of about $53,000 today. And that's household income. And we then asked, who are these students from lower income households? What are their demographic characteristics? What post-secondary degrees did they attain and in what degree programs? What industries did they go on to work in? And then finally, how did their earnings vary by the income level of the households that they grew up in? And we're measuring earnings again 3 years into the labor force. So starting with the first research question describing who these students are, we first looked at race ethnicity, and there are clear patterns by household income. Students from the highest income households, this top bar, were 84% white, as shown in this dark blue segment. And the proportion white decreased with household income quintile. Black students in teal and Latino students in this kind of purpley blue, combined, Black and Latino students were the majority of those from the lowest income households, quintile 1, but just 9% of those from the highest income households in quintile 5. We also looked at where students from low-income families were from. This is measured by where they went to high school. And the map on the left shows Illinois counties by the count of students from lower income households. So that's quintiles 1 and 2. And you can see, like the rest of the population, they're most densely populated in more urban counties. And the map on the right shows counties by percentage of students from lower income households. And you can see that downstate has some of the highest percentages, reaching up to 70% low income. And then we see close to 50% in other areas, including Chicago. And next we looked at students' outcomes, starting with education. Bachelor's degrees are the darkest blue bar, and you can see that it's the outcome for the majority of students from the two highest income households, the top two quintiles. But when you look at students from lower income households, less than a third earned a bachelor's or higher. The most common outcome for these students, it was starting college but not completing it. So that's the teal segments here. So now we can look at industry outcomes. The teal bar shows the average percentage of students who work in any industry in our data set who are from low-income families. It's about 2/5, actually a little bit under, which aligns with our definition of low income as being from the bottom 2/5 of the income distribution. The green bars show each industry's composition low income. So for example, accommodation and food services at the top is half students from low income households, whereas utilities is not even 30%. So now we're going to overlay blue bars showing what students in those industries earned on average. And you can see there's a pretty clear pattern. The industries where students from low-income households are most overrepresented tend to be lower earning, while those with the lowest representation of students from low-income households tend to be higher earning. And so now we're going to delve more into these earnings disparities. This slide shows the average earnings students have as adults broken down by the income quintile of the households they came from. And students from the lowest income households earned about $31,000 in 2017 dollars. That's annually, 3 years into the labor force. And that translates to about $41,000 today, adjusted for inflation. Students from the highest income households earned almost 50% more, $46,000, and that's about $61,000 today. So we can break this down by race. Here, the green lines show the number of students in each quintile by racial ethnic group. And you can see, as we saw earlier, that white students are far more likely to be from quintile 5, the highest income families, than quintile 1, the lowest. There were also more white students in each quintile than any other racial or ethnic group, um, given that they're the majority group statewide. Black and Latino students, on the other hand, were much more likely to come from lower income families than higher income families. And so now let's look at students' earnings as adults. First, we can see that in each racial ethnic group, students from higher income families earned more as adults than those from lower income families. And this intersects with race to really exacerbate existing inequalities. So, for example, this dotted blue line, it shows that Asian students from the lowest income households earned less than other Asian students from higher income households, but actually more than Black, Latino, and other race students from even the highest income households. And so Black and Latino students in particular really have a double disadvantage because they're the least likely to come from the higher income households. And then even when they do, they're earning less than students from white and Asian groups. We also looked at earnings by gender. Both men and women earned more if they came from higher income households, but women earned less than men at every household quintile. And we looked at so we've now looked at earnings disparities by students' demographics. Now we can look at those disparities by education level. So this graph shows average annual earnings for students by the highest level of education they attained, from no higher than a high school degree up through a master's, doctoral, or professional degree. And for simplicity, we're just going to show the comparison between students from the lowest income families in the green, that's quintile 1, and students from the highest income families in blue, which is quintile 5. And you can see that students from the higher income families earned more at every level of education, except, interestingly, high school only. However, the gaps between education levels are generally larger than the gaps within them. And so education was more predictive of future earnings than the income of the households students grew up in. So, for example, students from the lowest income households who attained a bachelor's degree earned more on average than students from even the highest income households who attained lower educational levels. And now we can look at specific educational degrees. This slide shows average adult earnings across degree programs. So this is like college major. And right now I'm showing just students who earned associate degrees or certificates. And again, the green dots show earnings for students from the lowest income households, and the blue show earnings for students from the highest income households. And again, students from higher income households earned more in every degree program, from agricultural, animal, plant, and veterinary science through visual and performing arts. But generally, degree program was more predictive than students' economic backgrounds for their future earnings. So, for example, students from the lowest income households who earned associate degrees or certificates in construction trades earn more than students from the highest income households in most of the other degree programs, with a couple exceptions here. Now, looking at bachelor's degrees and higher, we see a similar trend with a few exceptions where students from lower income households actually earn more. We see that for architecture and related services, philosophy and religious studies, and transportation and materials moving. And we also see quite a bit of variation in the spread of earnings by students' economic backgrounds. So, for example, physical sciences has similar earnings almost regardless of economic background. Same with architecture and related services. Whereas others like computer and information sciences have a difference of about $10,000. And then finally, we can look by industry. Across all industries, we see that students from the higher income households earned more than students from lower income households in the same industry. The gaps are a bit larger than what we saw for the degree programs because each industry shown here is inclusive of students with and without college degrees, whereas the gaps for the degree programs were only students who graduated with that degree. And despite some overlap between industries, industry itself is generally more predictive than students' economic backgrounds for predicting their adult earnings. But the caveat to remember is that students from lower income households were much more likely to be working in lower earning industries like accommodation and food services, and much less likely to be working in some of the higher earning industries like utilities. So even though when students from low income households work in those industries, they earn more, they're much less likely to be working in some of the higher earning industries. So what are our takeaways from this first report? Number one, students who earned higher educational degrees went on to earn more on average. And this was true for students from all economic backgrounds. Specific degree program and industry mattered. Some were higher earning than others, and that was true for students from all groups. But students from lower income families were less likely to attain higher degrees or work in higher earning industries. And then even with the same educational degree or a degree from the same degree program or work in the same industry, students from lower income families earned less than those from higher income families on average. So what can we do? Our next report, part 2, identifies promising pathways. These are education and industry pathways that lead to good jobs for all students, including those from lower income backgrounds. And this report we plan to release in a couple of weeks. But today I'm going to give you a sneak peek at some of our findings. So I said we're looking at pathways that lead to good jobs, but how do we define a good job? In this study, we say a good job is one in which a person's earnings are in the top 3 quintiles, so the top 60% relative to their peers in the same high school cohort. So we base this measure on earnings, following a large literature that shows earnings is very strongly correlated with many other aspects of job quality, like benefits, job security, stable schedules, opportunity for growth, sense of autonomy, and other working conditions. And then we use a relative measure in part because it helps us examine economic mobility. So all of the students we're following in report 2 started in families at the bottom 40% of earnings, students from low income families. And then we see who moved into the top 60%. And we asked what proportion of those students from low income families who took different pathways ended up in good jobs 3 years into the workforce. So this graph shows how different education degree levels played out for students from low income families. And there's a lot to unpack, so I'm going to walk through it. First, the size of each circle represents the number of students from low-income families who achieved that level of education within 6 years of graduating high school. And the largest circle is some college but no degree, meaning students started school but they did not finish within 6 years. This was the highest level of education for by far the largest number of students from low-income families, about 32,000 students. And you might remember this from the previous slide, showing something similar. It was, so the some college no degree was followed in number by students who earned a bachelor's degree, then associate degree, and then high school only. Certificates and master's, doctoral, and professional degrees were the least common. But again, this is within just 6 years of graduating high school. So it makes sense that these advanced degrees were very rare. And then the proportion of the circle above this dotted green line that we're calling the good job threshold, that's the proportion within the degree category who worked in a good job. So again, all of the students shown in this sample started in lower income families. So those in the bottom 40% of household income. And earning above the good job threshold means that they've achieved some degree of upward economic mobility. And you can see that these proportions increase as level of educational attainment increases. Just 19% of students with no more than a high school degree worked in a good job, compared to 79% with a bachelor's and 92% with an advanced degree. So clearly, higher education is associated with higher likelihood of working in a good job, but there's also a lot of variation within each level. So take associate degrees for an example. Just over half of students from low-income families who earned an associate worked in a good job, but that means almost half did not. So what specific pathways did the students who ended in a good job take? First, we can look at programs of study. Again, this is like college major. And several stood out as promising for students from low-income families. Those were engineering and engineering-related technologies, health professions and related programs, agricultural, animal, plant, and veterinary science, and mechanic and repair technologies. And in fact, 69% or more of students who enrolled in these fields attained good jobs. I should say students from low-income households who study in these fields attained good jobs. That is at the same rate that students from middle and high-income families generally work in good jobs. And next, we can look at what industries were promising pathways. So industries that led to good jobs for students from low-income households included wholesale trade, construction, manufacturing, management of companies and enterprises, public administration, and professional, scientific, and technical services. However, these pathways don't have the same payoff for everyone in this associate degree category. So on average, we said about just over half of students with associate degrees landed in a good job. But when we break it down by gender, we see that 60% of men with associates had a good job compared to 48% of women. And then when we break it down further by race ethnicity, we see even more gaps. So with this intersectional lens, we see a 20 percentage point gap between Latino men and Black women. And this is all students who have the same degree, associate degree. And so in this report, we are kind of breaking down these pathways across degree levels and student demographics. And again, you can read that report when it comes out in a couple of weeks. So I will close with thanking the project's funders at both IWERC and the consortium. And we'll drop the link to the first report in the chat for you again. And these are the wonderful co-authors of both reports. So thank you, and I will pass it back at this time for questions.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Appreciate it. And thank you, Jenny, for coming back on. That was really, really just illuminating and really helpful. And I'm really particularly excited to get that sneak peek of the part two of the report since I hadn't seen it yet. So thank you for sharing. We've got some questions coming in the Q&A, and I'm going to ask right now for additional questions that folks have. Please drop them in the Q&A and we'll try to get to as many as we can. We've got a good chunk of time, so I'm excited to hear your questions. Put those in the chat. I think maybe one that I wanted to voice over from Chris is, were there any promising pathways for people without degrees, meaning any exceptions
Mm.
to the general trend?
That's a great question. I will say yes. There were promising pathways for people who had some college but didn't attain the degree. We did not see promising pathways for people with high school only.
Mhm.
Um, and so those pathways, again, we have them detailed in report too.
Helpful, thank you. And then, Jenny, I know that you might be typing an answer to this, but I thought I saw a note of being surprised by the fact that no school district outside of Chicago has increased their high school graduation requirements, even in affluent communities, voicing some concern that many low-income students across the state might not be well prepared for college, which of course is, an opinion statement perhaps. But any things you all have seen, especially statewide, I know that at Two and Through are more familiar with Chicago Public Schools work, but anything that you've seen in your partnerships that folks are doing across the state to improve college going uh, practices.
I mean, Sarah, I'm wondering if you want to talk a little bit about like the dual enrollment work that you did, because that's certainly one of the areas that people think about when providing, I know, opportunities to experience college, helping students be more prepared for college, all of that.
Yeah, that's what came to mind for me as well. There has been a big push in districts statewide to increase dual enrollment opportunities. Dual credit is the technically what it's called in Illinois. Um, and along with that is AP. But I think in terms of getting students the college experience and college credit, so that's what dual credit is. Students earn both high school and college credits. Um, that's a practice that has been shown in the education research literature to improve um, college enrollment and college persistence, which suggests that it improves preparation for college, especially for students on the margin who maybe, the students who maybe wouldn't have persisted if they hadn't had prior experiences, and whether that's, academically rigorous experiences, getting knowledge and skills that help them succeed, or whether it's more about social emotional and um, feeling like I am the type of student who earns college credit. I understand what college looks like or feels like, and I'm capable of earning college credits. I think that's kind of still open for debate. Um, so yeah, that's one way I think districts are working to improve preparation.
I was also thinking about Ed Systems Success Network work, and I'll drop a link to some of their reports in the chat because that might be relevant as well.
Oh, great.
Um, Thank you. And then Chris had a follow-up question to his original question around the high school only designation. Does that include folks who obtained a
Yeah.
certificate, or is that considered a different category?
Yeah, certificates is its own category. It's a small category, but we do separate them out.
Got it. Thank you. And then Mizuzu asked, are there any plans for continuing this kind of analysis for future cohorts, or is this a single point in time project?
I think it's
We would
a,
love
we like
to.
to, yeah, right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, right now, we have these 5 cohorts, and we're hoping that we get to continue collaborating with the state to understand student trajectories over time.
Super helpful. And can you remind us what cohorts you were looking at in this study again, just so that's top of mind for folks?
Yes, these were the senior classes of 2008 through 2012. So they're graduating like right during and right after the Great Recession.
Super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oops, I
And
just,
I just want to kind of acknowledge that that was like a while ago, but part of the way, what we're trying to, I think it's always like the tricky thing I think about whenever you're looking at like post like longer term outcomes is how much time you have to let elapse. And so we're allowing, students to have 6 years to graduate from college. And then we're also giving some time to actually be able to see kind of more stable workforce outcomes, because quite often, like, the first job that somebody has out of college is not really a job that they're in for a little bit longer. So we're trying to the idea was to get kind of taking a dipstick into what felt like a little bit more of a stable, longer term trajectory for students, and what may happen to them more in the future with their careers.
Mhm.
Super helpful. Thank you. And then maybe a related question from Maureen. Will you be looking more into the pathways students in CPS take and how they compare to pathways taken by students in other parts of Illinois? Is there a way that Chicago gets kind of pulled out in the data, or could continue to be pulled out in the data for clarity's sake?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I guess we have hopes for another phase of this work. And, obviously, I think being able to take a look at Chicago would be, a really important addition to this, given, how we could connect it. I mean, maybe selfishly think so, but given to be able to connect it to the work that the consortium and To and Through has done. And I think, and also just because in terms of how we think about employment outcomes, about how that's also like a regional phenomenon, and the job markets do vary by where you are in the state. So I think also being able to disaggregate based on geography is also important here.
Yeah, I think that's really valuable, both the diversity of geography and
Mhm.
opportunity, and also like your point about time, Jenny, makes me think we need more of this, hopefully. And then Will asks, there seems to be more variability in earnings across income groups based on bachelor's degree attainment. Some degrees had some degrees had students from low income families out earning students from higher income families. Is there any guess as to why that might be?
I do have a guess. So you saw from our charts just about the degree students are earning that students from low-income families, they're earning bachelor's degrees at much lower rates, which suggests that they are overcoming a lot of hurdles in order to get that degree. So I think the students from low-income families who have a bachelor's degree are a pretty select group. Um, and that may well translate into higher earnings. We don't know for sure. That's one hypothesis. But unfortunately, we don't have the qualitative piece to this to fully flesh out what's going on. What do you think, Jenny?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it is interesting, and I think it's also, yeah, we don't know if there's like a motivational factor going into this. I mean, I think it is like, I think, what I think it's this study just sort of lends itself to wanting to, like, it raises more, I mean, it answers some really critical questions as a baseline, but it raises all of these other questions about student characteristics, the characteristics of high schools, about colleges, all these different things that we really don't know, unfortunately. Um,
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's a good call to action on the qualitative end. And it's just
mhm,
making me think of things for the tune through side of how we can talk more about the transition to career in our own student stories work. So I appreciate the question and agree
mhm.
that that's something we need to know more about. Um, Kind of a combined question here. Do we have a sense of how these findings compare to national numbers or to other states that may have done similar analysis about work outcomes by degree attainment? And or are there states that have particularly positive income outcomes for low income students? And if so, do you know what those are?
Yes, there's definitely been some national work answering similar questions. I would point to the Georgetown Center for Education in the Workforce, and in fact, we cite some of their reports in our lit review, but then in report two, the chart that I shared earlier with the bubbles is like inspired by some of the work that they've done, and we cite it in that report, so you can check that out. But I would say that the overall trends are very similar to what they have found nationally in terms of, the variation within each degree level and the disparities within each degree level and within industries by economic background and by gender and by race. In terms of states that have especially positive outcomes,
Yeah,
I
I
don't
don't know.
know.
Yeah, I mean, I would guess there probably are some that are doing more around this, maybe, or they have a different um employment climate or whatever else. But um, this isn't. I mean, I think one of the things, just to kind of name it, is that this is really kind of an emerging and underdeveloped area where people are really kind of, especially to be thinking about this in terms of like intentionally trying to help students across this transition from college into the workforce. I mean, obviously, colleges have career services where they are individually thinking about it, but I think it's one of those places where, as kind of a larger education field, I kind of tell the story a lot too, where it's kind of like when I first started working in this, there was sort of this assumption that students didn't want to go to college. And then we realized they didn't want to go to college. And then we kind of thought, oh, well, once we get them enrolled in college, that's the same as having a college degree. And obviously that is not the case. And then when we're thinking about students graduating from college, this doesn't automatically lead to a good job. And so I think, there's a lot more, or I think we're sort of part of this push is for there to be more intentionality around that and knowing that this is difficult, especially for first generation college students who may not have the social capital, social networks to really understand or like, be able to learn from people in their families and their communities, et cetera, about how one would go about to um, negotiate for a job or being able to do internships or understanding the whole interview process or how do you be really successful in your job search. I mean, I think it's something that um, I feel like a lot of places it's sort of been taken for granted that this is something that college students know, and that's clearly not the case. So I think that's just kind of an area for growth. And there are organizations I just want to name Braven, who's really seen this, and they're doing work here at National Louis, among other colleges, that I think is really identified a critical area around higher education and this critical transition to the workforce that where there's just a lot of work that we need to be doing.
Awesome. And another person in the Q&A had referenced the National Bureau of Economic Research report that came out in 2025. It looks like around who rides out the storm, immediate post-college transition and
Mhm.
its role in socioeconomic earnings. So that could be another place to look at the nationwide story. Is that something that
Yeah.
came up in your all's work at all?
I think it came out
Yeah.
after we were doing like the core part
Mhm.
of our, but we did like send this back and forth, I
It
think, for
was
the
just
second
after
report.
for a while.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so we're like, oh, we have to include this. This is really important. So I think it, I don't know if it like actually like exactly like adds something new, but I think it really does point to like what we're finding and how much the jobs that we're looking at in the report actually matter, that it's really setting the stage for what happens in the future.
Mhm.
Because I think sometimes I think people say like, yeah, people take a while to figure out their careers, which they do, but there's a lot, I think, and even prior to this specific study, there has been other work which was sort of naming how the first job that young people have out after college does set an earnings trajectory for the longer term. And so that's I don't know, just something to pay attention to. I think it's also something I think that people were feeling it was particularly salient like during the pandemic when job searches were so hard. And there were concerns that recent college graduates may be um, setting themselves up to have lower lifetime earnings just because they had happened to have completed college at a time when finding a job was considerably more difficult.
Yeah. And I would say that a similar conversation is happening now in terms of the job
Mhm.
market for recent grads.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
exactly. Yeah.
And Misuzu asked a good question that I was also wondering about. I'm going to put the question thread in the chat so other folks can see
Mhm.
it. But just how to visualize who is and isn't in this data could be a
Mhm.
helpful thing. And I was thinking about on the FAFSA requirement, students who are undocumented obviously
Mhm.
wouldn't would unlikely be included given that they are not eligible to complete the FAFSA. But Masuza brings up also high income families who might not complete the
Hmm.
FAFSA.
Right.
So just like how might that uh, impact the report, or how could we visualize who is not yet captured in this data? Does that bring up any
Hmm.
thoughts for you?
Yeah, it's a good point. I will say, surprisingly, when we looked at student demographics like race and gender and like
I think
IEP
yeah,
status,
student had a good point. Yeah, I
English
think so.
learners,
Right.
it was pretty similar between students who were in the sample and students who were not. The English learner in particular, I believe it's because there's an alternative form that they can complete that we kind of subsumed within the category of FAFSA. I should have been more clear about
Oh, I
that.
see. Okay, that's
Um,
helpful. I didn't realize
yeah,
that. Okay.
I wish our co-author, she's in the audience. Both of them from ISAC can explain that better, but maybe if they do the session after this, they can explain better.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
but I mean, but honestly, that was like one of our big concerns. Like, are we
Yeah.
having like a biased sample, and like, are we not actually telling what's happening across the state? It's certainly not perfect, but it was considerably better than we thought it would be in being representative of students across the state.
Super helpful. Good to know. Okay, well, I want to close with maybe just a 1 minute response from each of you about just what is giving you hope after this research and report comes out, or any sort of final calls to action before we transition into the post discussion.
Um, I don't know.
I
I'm trying to think go ahead, Sarah. Yeah.
I was gonna say, I think for me the hope is just kind of like this reaffirmation that, you know, encouraging students, preparing students to get some sort of post-secondary education pays off for them. So right now there's just so much kind of mistrust of higher educational institutions and questioning about like, is the degree really going to pay off for me if I take on debt? And we did some back of the envelope calculations, and even accounting for the debt students are likely to take on, they're earning more with these higher degrees. So that gives me hope. I think the area to work is just, that circle of the students with some college but no degree is
Mhm.
so big. And they have debt potentially, and they don't have, much of a earnings premium, and that's a really hard place to be in. So. What would you say, Jenny?
Yeah, I mean, I think those were actually two of the ones that I was thinking about. I think also just I think place where I would want to be thinking a lot more about is around how like understanding better and digging deeper into like why it would be that students who like how much family background plays a role in terms of the how much students are making after they graduate from college. I think in some ways it's not surprising, but I think it also goes contrary to what our hopes are for college, that colleges can be an engine for mobility, and they certainly it we're showing that yes, that's true, but it's not to the extent that we really hope for. And I think just understanding that better. And I think that's both like something that's qualitative and quantitative, because I think one other thing I just want to quickly mention, because I know we're out of time, is that, we're using income as the measure of what a good outcome is. I know that like my hopes for what happens for students while they're in college is not just about the jobs that they have, but the kind of experiences they're having during college and the kinds of opportunities and people that they can become by virtue of having that kind of experience. And so I kind of like I have concerns about what it is, but I also think that the experiences that people are having inside of college is not something that is going to disappear because they have had them.
Mhm. Yeah, I appreciate you ending on that, Jenny. That was something that I wanted to make sure to get to. So I'm glad you named that. It's not only financial, there are other
Mhm.
pieces, and how can we ensure the return of an investment, both financial and personal, comes true for families and students. Well, thank you so much, Sarah and Jenny. Really, really appreciated this, and I hope many people stick around for this post discussion. Our goal in our post discussion is always to build community and connection, to process the presentation, content, and community with others, and to discuss implications implications and takeaways for your work. And we'd really love to hear your all's ideas around what the different lenses of the systems, both high schools and colleges and workforce, can do better to make this a more equitable reality for students and families across Illinois. So stick around. My colleague just put the link in the chat, and so we'll head over there, and we hope you join us. And if not, we will see you at our next events. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Yeah, thank you
everybody.
everyone for coming.